The police showed up at my apartment, and that's how I found out my own parents had secretly taken out a $82,000 loan in my name. I never imagined my own parents would destroy my future just to save themselves. The day I turned 23, I walked into my bank expecting to get approved for my very first mortgage. Instead, the loan officer looked at me with a confused expression. He asked, "Are you aware that you already owe over $80,000? I laughed. I honestly thought he was joking. I had never borrowed that much money in my life. Not even close. But when he turned his computer screen toward me, my smile disappeared. There it was, an $82,000 personal loan, opened 3 years earlier. Every document had my name, my social security number, my signature. Everything looked completely legitimate, except I had never signed a single page. I sat there frozen. My hands started shaking. The loan officer quietly asked if I wanted to report identity theft. At that moment, I had absolutely no idea who could have done something like this. Then I looked at the address listed on the application. It was my parents' house, the same house where I'd grown up. My stomach dropped. Deep down, I already knew exactly who was responsible, but I wasn't ready to believe it. I drove straight to my parents' house that evening, hoping there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. There had to be. When my mom opened the front door, she smiled like nothing had happened. She asked if I wanted dinner. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the loan paperwork on the kitchen table. The smile disappeared from her face instantly. A few seconds later, my dad walked into the room. He looked at the papers, then looked back at me. Nobody said a word. The silence told me everything I needed to know. My dad was the first to break the silence. He sighed, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "We were going to tell you eventually," he said. I stared at him, completely speechless. "Eventually?" I repeated. "You stole my identity, and you were going to tell me eventually?" My mom crossed her arms. "Don't be so dramatic," she said. "We're your parents." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, you actually did this?" Neither of them denied it. Instead, my dad leaned forward. "We didn't have another choice." I laughed, not because anything was funny, because I was in complete shock. "No choice? You could have asked me. We knew you'd say no," my mom replied without hesitation. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. They hadn't borrowed my identity because they trusted me. They borrowed it because they didn't care what happened to me. I looked down at the paperwork. $82,000. What did you even spend it on? My dad looked away. "The business." "What business?" "The construction company." I remembered exactly what he was talking about. 3 years earlier, he told everyone he had received an investment from an old friend. That was a lie. The investment was me, except nobody had bothered to tell me. I asked the question I was almost afraid to hear. "Did you ever plan on paying it back?" My parents exchanged another glance. My mom answered first. "We thought the business would make enough money. It didn't. So, you just stopped making payments?" She nodded, like she was talking about an overdue electricity bill, not the destruction of my entire financial future. I felt sick, because at that moment, I realized something even worse. This wasn't a desperate mistake. It had been a calculated decision. They had forged my signature, used my personal information, destroyed my credit, and then simply hoped I would never find out. I stood up. "You know what hurts the most?" Neither of them answered. "I trusted you." My dad finally spoke. "We're still family." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, you stopped being family the day you signed my name." Without saying another word, I picked up the paperwork, walked out the front door, and made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. The next morning, I did something my parents never expected. I didn't call them. I didn't argue. And I definitely didn't forgive them. Instead, I drove straight to the local police department. Walking through those doors was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, not because I was afraid, but because filing the report meant accepting one painful truth. My own parents had committed identity theft. The officer listened carefully while I explained everything. He looked through the loan documents, compared the signatures, and asked one question. "Did you authorize this loan?" "No," I answered immediately. "Did you ever give anyone permission to sign your name?" "Never." He nodded and started typing. By the time I left the station, an official investigation had begun. A few hours later, I contacted the bank's fraud department. They froze the account and opened their own investigation. The representative explained that if fraud was confirmed, I wouldn't be responsible for the debt. It was the first piece of good news I'd heard in days. Then, my phone rang. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, my dad called. Then my brother. Then my aunt. Within an hour, my entire family knew what I'd done. My voicemail filled up fast. Some relatives begged me to think about the family. Others called me selfish. One uncle even said, "Your parents gave you life. You owe them." I couldn't believe it. Not one of them asked how I was doing. Not one of them asked if I was okay. They only cared that my parents might face consequences. That night, my older brother showed up at my apartment. He knocked for almost 5 minutes before I finally opened the door. He didn't even say hello. "You need to drop the charges," he said. I folded my arms. "Why? They're mom and dad." I shook my head. "They committed fraud. They were desperate." "So that makes it okay?" He sighed. "If they get arrested, it'll destroy this family." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, they destroyed this family the moment they decided my future was worth sacrificing." For the first time in his life, he had no response. He quietly turned around, walked back to his car, and drove away. A week later, the bank called me with an update. What they told me left me completely speechless. A week later, the bank finally called with the results of their investigation. The representative's voice was calm. "Mr. Carter, we've confirmed that the loan documents contain forged signatures." I closed my eyes, even though I'd known the truth all along. Hearing someone else confirm it made everything feel real. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "The loan has been removed from your credit report," she replied. "You are no longer responsible for the debt." I sat there in silence. For the first time in weeks, I could actually breathe again. But then she added something I wasn't expecting. "We've forwarded the case to our legal department." My stomach tightened. "They'll decide whether to pursue criminal charges." After hanging up, I stared out the window for a long time. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. I hadn't wanted my parents to end up in court. I'd only wanted my life back. 2 days later, my mom showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. The moment I opened the door, she started crying. "We're going to lose everything," she whispered. "Our house, your father's business, everything." I stayed quiet. She stepped closer. "If you tell the bank it was all a misunderstanding, they'll stop." I couldn't believe she was still asking me to lie. "Mom, it wasn't a misunderstanding. You stole my identity." She wiped away her tears. "We're family. You don't do this to family." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered as calmly as I could. "No, you don't steal from family." She froze. For the first time, she had nothing to say. She slowly turned around, walked back to her car, and drove away. A few weeks later, the investigation was officially closed. The bank cleared my name completely. The debt was gone. My credit score started recovering, but my parents weren't as lucky. Their business was already drowning in debt. Without access to more loans, it collapsed within months. Soon after, they had to sell their house. Some relatives blamed me. Others quietly admitted my parents had brought it on themselves. Then, one evening, I received a letter from an attorney. It wasn't from the bank. It was from my parents, and what they were asking for made me laugh out loud. I opened the envelope and almost laughed. My parents weren't apologizing. They weren't taking responsibility. Instead, they were asking me for help. Their attorney explained that the business had officially filed for bankruptcy. Their house had been sold. Most of the money was gone. And now, they wanted me to help them get back on their feet. At the bottom of the letter was a sentence I still remember. "We hope you'll remember that family should always forgive family." I read it twice. Then I folded the letter, placed it back inside the envelope, and quietly threw it in the trash. That was my answer. A few days later, my older brother called. This time, his voice was different. "I owe you an apology," he said. I stayed silent. I didn't believe you at first, but after everything came out, I found out Mom and Dad had lied to all of us. He admitted they had borrowed money from other relatives, made promises they never intended to keep, and blamed everyone else whenever things went wrong. "I should have listened to you," he said. "It wasn't your fault." For the first time in years, we actually had an honest conversation. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. My credit recovered. I finally qualified for a mortgage, and I bought a small house of my own. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room for nearly an hour. Not because it was a big house, it wasn't, but because every wall, every window, every single room belonged to me. Nobody could take it away. Nobody could sign my name. Nobody could control my future anymore. About a year later, I ran into my parents at a grocery store. They looked older, tired. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. My mom finally whispered, "We made a terrible mistake." I nodded. "Yes, you did." She looked like she wanted to say more. Maybe she expected forgiveness. Maybe she expected another chance. Instead, I wished them well, turned around, and walked away. Not because I hated them, but because peace doesn't always come from getting revenge. Sometimes, peace comes from refusing to let the people who hurt you control your life ever again. Looking back now, people still ask if I regret reporting my own parents. My answer is always the same. No, because I didn't destroy my family. The day they chose to steal my identity, they made that decision themselves. And the day I finally stood up for myself was the day I stopped being their victim. It was the day I finally became free.